I think we're going to get started, everyone. So we are going to be talking about bringing ideas to life, talking tech for non-technical folks. We have Andrew Bauer and Pat Riley from 5HD. So Andrew Bauer, as a WordPress core contributor and veteran of Boston University's web team, Andrew Bauer is truly passionate about open source. He worked to build and maintain higher ed WordPress platforms, scaling over 10 million monthly views and 1,000 plus production sites. As Director of Development for 5HD, Andrew helps clients to solve business problems and bring cutting-edge digital experiences to life. I was just thinking.
I just want to say for the record, I didn't know you were reading this whole thing on a room.
Hopefully everyone can hear me as I'm like talking over here.
It's etiquette.
Pat Riley over here. Pat Riley crafts award-winning digital marketing and communication strategies for regional and national brands as a partner at 5HD. Pat began his career as a sports broadcaster for professional and collegiate athletic programs, including the Chicago White Sox, Virginia Tech Hokies, and Syracuse Orangemen. A proud graduate of SI Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University, Pat strives to change the way people think through authentic and innovative communication. And here they are.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank all of you. Okay, to tell us when we're going over time.
Yeah, and here's your monitor.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you guys very much for being here. I guess we'll just dive right in. Yeah. So we're going to set a little scene here for you, and maybe it's something you might recognize from something at work. So Andrew, in our office, I really want to up the morale in the office. I want people to have a lot more fun. So I've got an idea for a project.
All right, let's hear it, Pat.
I want to build a 3-tiered rope and platform thing. There's a big tree in the back of the office. I think people have a lot of fun with this rope tiered deal. So
all right. So I got a pretty good idea. You want something like this, right? Just kind of launch off the tree and come back and something like that, right?
We don't have enough insurance for that.
Oh, cool.
So I was talking to some of my other strategist friends, and they said, like, this could be the coolest rope tree cushiony thing. They said, you're a really good developer. It's a one-click.
That was easy.
Thing we can do. It's super easy to do. No problem. You're a development whiz. It's just point and click, right? You just write a little code and it just happens.
Something like that. Honestly, that's a couch in a tree. I mean, I don't think I'm tall enough to get that up there. So this is about as much as I could give you. That's probably what we're gonna have to do.
I'm not happy with the trajectory of this project. So I don't know if we find that working as an agency, we're often working with the combination of a business unit, a Marcom team, and a development or an IT team, and getting communication across those verticals can sometimes be difficult. There are some built-in challenges, and as I'm sure many of you know, we run into some scenarios where in higher ed projects get shelved, they get pushed off. Sometimes they just straight up fail because of a lack of communication or a lack of sometimes effective process around some of these things. So what we want to talk to you today about is, from our perspective, when we're working with kind of these three departments within an institution, what are some best practices for making sure that we understand the real needs of a project and also making sure that it gets launched and everybody's kind of happy with the process. So we wanted to start with a real life problem. So we'll talk through a project that we did recently in the last year. Curry College is a small private institution just outside of Boston. Our offices are in Canton, Massachusetts, also just outside of Boston. We had done some work for the school in the past. They came to me with a specific problem in their division of continuing and graduate studies. It's an admissions issue they were having where they were seeing sort of 3 or 4 year declining in enrollment. They were having problems with getting their lead generation where they needed it to be. And we just had some kind of bad factors for them from an admissions perspective. They came to us really starting to think about, obviously, so as an agency, we work sometimes on the marketing side and sometimes on the dev side. They wanted us to spend their money better from a media perspective. And that was all well and good. We can do that. But we wanted to take a step back and take a little bit more of a holistic approach to what the problems were.
So the big question today is kind of how do we get there? And it can be kind of deceiving because a lot of times you get there and you kind of, whoops.
You want me to go back?
Nope, just forward one actually.
All right.
Yeah, there we go. So it can be deceiving kind of out of the gate because to really understand the problem, you kind of have to get everybody together and really dive into it from the get-go. So it can seem like your client comes to you and says, I have this problem with enrollment, and they start coming up with solutions. They're like, oh, we need a whole new website, we need all this, we need all that. But the first step is to take a step back and say, okay, what are we doing here? What are the business goals? And that's the first step to identify. It really works best if you can get everybody together in one room or, face-to-face, conference call if that's not possible. But having everybody in one room is key because that's the most kind of transparent and the easiest way to reduce that friction there between the initial set of communications and start you off on the best foot forwards. So,
and we usually end up finding also when we're setting up these we have a problem, we need to fix something. There's an underlying problem that nobody's quite saying, like they're trying to jump into the fix to our little Abbott and Costello routine at the beginning. I'm saying I want a 3-tiered swing, but what the real problem is I want people to have more fun at the office. I'm trying to boost morale. So maybe maybe the suggested solution for that problem is a step beyond, a step back from we have to build a swing. It's like, well, what is the actual underlying issue?
And you're only going to get at that underlying issue if you keep asking questions. So as soon as somebody, says something, you kind of got to keep going and keep digging until you get to the actual root cause there, what the real motivation behind that is. And sometimes that's really tough to get to, but as best you can, keep digging until you've got something concrete that you can kind of track against. So once you've got those goals in mind and you figured out what the business objectives are, you really want to figure out who's going to be the target of this solution. So you're the audience that you're building it for, whether that's in higher ed for the students or maybe for the faculty, and really spec that audience out so you can say, this is exactly who's going to be consuming the thing that we're building, because that's important to know out of the gate.
And we find one of the most important things that, and we challenge our clients in all 3 divisions, but even from where you're sitting, whether it's in the client seat or on the dev side, doing some homework into the problem ahead of time can really yield a lot of good returns when you're starting to spec something out. So as an agency, we try to do that every time a problem comes to us. To go back to this case study, they were, again, the stated issue was declining enrollment, and how do we fix that? And declining leads is a factor of declining enrollment. So we went in and just tried to understand who the prospective students are and what the prospective student journey was. We identified that they were working with a legacy CMS that was really kind of constricting some of their design choices. They were on an MDOT site at the time, and they're all very well aware of this. They've actually, since we've been working with them, started to launch a spec out of an entire new website design. But they had some stuff that was a little bit older that was making it difficult for a prospective student to get to not only the information that they needed for the program, but also to ask for more, to become a lead, to say, hey, I'd like to actually speak to a counselor, which is really how the sales process works, as I'm sure a lot of you know on the admission side. Then the biggest issue that we were having for them just out of the gate was this is what their inquiry form looked like.
For any inquiry, as soon as somebody landed on their site and they wanted to get even a brochure or a PDF, any kind of information, they had to fill out name, address, phone number, all that stuff. There wasn't a quick and easy way to get in touch with somebody at admissions.
And that was leading to, so stepping back from the admissions issues and stepping back from the lead issue, their website traffic to lead conversion rate was hovering around 1%. And we're like, it's going to be really hard. They've come to us asking for, spending more media in a better way. It's like, well, we can flush a good deal of money at media, but you're going to have the same continual problem if we're working with a 1% conversion. So we have to address this issue first and try to optimize that spot so that, even if we could get it to a 2.5 or a 3 in the near term, it sounds like a small change, but that's going to yield a huge result for you. So that's when you start mapping out a plan.
Yeah, and your first step into mapping out a plan and to really having that concrete thing you can start to work your project against is to really understand the audience. So you've identified them before, that maybe they're faculty, maybe they're incoming students, that sort of thing. And now it's the time to start doing more research and doing, what are their motivations behind that, really coming up with kind of a profile for different things they'd be interested in, and deeply understand them, because they, after all, are the ones that you're doing this project for. So there we go. how do we increase value for them? How do we increase value for the business? Because sometimes those things are the same goal. Sometimes they're separate. So it's figuring out how to meet them in the middle. And that's an important thing to remember, because you're juggling all these different priorities that everybody has. And it's figuring out that middle ground there to kind of combine them. And one of the best ways to do that is by creating user stories. So you really make them kind of personal, and you really say, okay, well, if Joe ends up on our site and he's trying to get more information about our program offerings, then this is something that Joe would like to do because he's on his phone. He wants to request information from us as quickly as possible. So when we're looking at that gigantic form that you have on the site before, let's improve it for Joe, and let's really work this to something that he would benefit from. And it's hard to kind of keep that perspective, because a lot of times you'll look at a form and you'll say, okay, well, this is how I would fill it out, or somebody else will look at a form and say, okay, well, it's not really that complicated. It's only 12 or 13 fields. But you think about somebody that might be going through a subway with limited connectivity or something like that. You really have to put yourself in their shoes for that kind of thing.
Also, when you can do the user stories thing, and in this instance, we weren't able to kind of dive into the data the way we usually like to, but if you can take some time to create personas around both the use of your website currently that you can get from analytics, if you can get any data shared from the business unit itself in terms of ages, locations, work backgrounds, anything that you can pull into an actual persona. We can then also do some interviewing with those folks. We'll often do, just to try to put some qualitative stuff around this quantitative ask. And then you can really understand, like Andrew's talking about, if this person's we're in Boston, so a commuter is either driving 30 to 45 minutes a day, or they're in some kind of a rail situation for 30 to 45 minutes a day. So if we're looking at Joe, who works downtown in finance, Joe's probably taking the rail, so we know that he's going to be on a mobile device, and we also know he needs his information quickly. We were talking before, so the T in Boston is sometimes a little unreliable. So some of the stuff in there, you take that into account when you're building out these processes and what people are going to need. Yeah, and we've got a couple things here too. I mean, one thing to our benefit was that we were working with sort of the whole college as a whole, and we were trying to focus on admissions. But if you're working on something that's maybe just within your department, and maybe something that only you think is going to benefit your immediate team or the immediate people using your application in that context, try and think bigger. So try and think, maybe this is something that can apply more university-wide and can apply to a broader scenario. And can we get other people on board? Can we get more institutional resources behind it if we're able to think of something bigger than just this individual instance? So if it's something that's a kind of a department inquiry form, for example, maybe it's something that a broader template for an inquiry form is something that would be a better plan, because that's something you'd be able to get more support behind. That kind of thing is something that, help get that track going there too. And the last step of kind of beginning to start a plan is figuring out how you're going to drive success. Because how are you going to know if your project is done and complete and was overall something positive, and setting those out of the gate to say, this is exactly what we want out of this, makes it a lot easier as everybody's going along to keep it in check and say, okay, well, this is something that's progressing according to the way we originally set it out, or this is something we need to take another look at, or maybe this doesn't fit into the scope because it's not something that gets us to that original success metric. So talking about, once you've defined what is going to be success for this project, we find also that you need to define how are you going to measure that success, and what are you going to do right out of the gate. We talk about KPIs all the time. I mean, from a development perspective, what are kind of the key takeaways you want from this project? What's going to make everybody happy? What's going to make this be a success? And then we try to start measuring those factors before we've even started the build. So you have a baseline, you have a benchmark for, how do things work now? And then what we're trying to test, what we're trying to do, how are they going to work in the future? And then just continue to report throughout the process. So we'll even, we'll get to outcomes of this case study in a bit, but we'll try to spend even the lead up time before that, setting kind of this measurement architecture, and give ourselves, as long as we can get with data ahead of time, and that gives you a really good sense of even as you're going through the project, what's being useful. And this was honestly one of the hardest slides, and we're going to cover it at kind of a high level. It's something that's really can be particular to your individual instance and your university for what resources are available. But at the highest level, you're looking for a couple of different components on any project that you're working with. You want to
take the UX perspective to keep your users in mind and figure out, you know, that direction of things. And it doesn't take somebody that's a UX professional to be able to come in and do that. If you can put yourself in the user's shoes and ask questions and get a couple, you can get 5 people to look at something as you're thinking about it and say, is this something that would work for you? Even if it's drawn out on a napkin, that's the best way to start getting feedback. So it's something you can do without having a full resource boat there.
Sometimes it can be as simple, and you know, we have 20 or 30 folks on staff, on our combined staffs with a partner company. It can be as simple as like picking out, you know, we have an idea of our personas and picking out the people in the office who kind of fit or tangentially fit those personas and say, okay, go try to sign up for a program. You know, pretend you're looking for an MBA, go sign up for a program, let me know what you find out. One of the things that we didn't talk about that's wasn't really focused on this part of the case study, but we found people kept coming back to that big form we showed, but then we also found out once they filled it out, there was no automated process for response on the back end. And we heard that from the client once we started asking the question, but we had 3 people sign up for the same program and they got 3 different emails back at 3 different periods. One was 3 days, one was 6 days, one was 10 days. And all 3 of those are too late. And it ended up opening up an entire kind of conversation about what lead nurture should look like, and I think got them to a much stronger place.
Yeah, and it's a really great way to improve the user experience and kind of get them that feedback and get them that attention that they needed. But it's something that, you know, was identified by people, you know, that don't necessarily specialize in UX, and it's something that you could definitely do on your team too. Just by spreading it out to the broader audience and saying, hey, can I get a fresh set of eyes on this? And, you know, in terms of assembling your team, if you're not a developer and you're looking for a way to kind of build stuff out, there's a ton of different resources. One of the reasons open source is so great is because there are so many different resources out there. There's people solving the same challenges that you might be trying to solve, whether it's an authentication kind of plugin or something like that you're trying to address for your university. Somebody might have already solved it, and you look at something like WordPress.org and you know, you're investigating plugins from that side, but then also leaning on the kind of WPCampus community, the local meetup communities. A lot of times you'll find people that are working through the same challenges as you. Maybe they'll be able to offer you a hand with some aspect of it. Maybe you can combine that with other things, especially if you've got a couple of different groups that are trying to solve the same problem. People can come together and kind of work around that.
Something else that can be important is utilizing tools when doing this stuff. Obviously, you know, we're talking about a scenario where you get everybody in the same room, and that's great, and that does not always exist. You know, sometimes people are on the other side of the country or in other places, and even if it's just on your campus, you know, we work with plenty of campuses where trying to get somebody just to walk across campus or walk across several city blocks for meetings can be difficult. So trying to keep everybody on track. We use some combination of these tools, and for everybody it's different, for every scenario it's different. We just wanted to highlight some things that, you know, sometimes if you're just leading on a very simple project management piece, it can be useful.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes you'll get pushback because if you're at the university and there's a certain project management tool that's supposed to be the way you do it, you know, maybe you're supposed to do everything in Microsoft Project and put it up on SharePoint, you know, you might get pushback on certain things. Sometimes though, if you're able to kind of get people to see the benefits of a simpler tool, that it's something that people will use on a daily basis, and you don't have to be a project manager that has Windows and project installed to be able to see what the upcoming deadlines are, that's really a win for everybody. So if you're able to kind of introduce it really constructively to say, this is something that's going to help us, you know, do better on this project, and it's going to make everybody's lives simpler. Starting kind of dipping your toes into something like Trello or Asana it can be really great on a project by project basis if it's something that everybody is comfortable trying out. And once you're on one of the tools like that, in addition to kind of bringing all your communication into one place, the really fantastic part about it is you can start automating these things that normally would be like a huge burden during a project. So instead of sending out reminder emails that, hey, you've got this task due as part of the project, or, you know, what was that requirement that was this piece of the project, you know, who came up with that, and what's been that communication around that, you can automate those things so that whenever you've got a task coming up due, it automatically has the right attachments assigned to it, and it's automatically going to the right person and keeping them accountable. Because if you've got them setting kind of their own deadlines and you say, okay, Pat, when can we get this by? You know, when is this doable from a strategy side and with your schedule? You get Pat to go in and put his own due date on it. You know, that's something he's got control over. And then Trello is sending him automations, and I'm not, you know, sending him notifications every week saying, hey, Pat, you said you're going to have this done last week. You
I'm
got
not mad
Trello
at
doing
Andrew,
that
I'm
for
mad
him.
at Trello.
Exactly, yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So the next step really, I mean, is to start building. So get as much of the team in place in-house as you can. You know, if you're able to rely on some outside resources, people from other universities, if it's even something that's completely separate from maybe your main WordPress install and you've got it up at WP Engine or up on a host like that that's more managed, they might be able to even point you in the directions of, hey, these are things that work great on our platforms, or different solutions that work well there. And I mean, just start building and start tracking against those goals that you originally set up. And that's the importance of setting them up early, so that you can't keep adding things in at this late stage so that you're halfway done building the project and all of a sudden more things are getting added to the bottom. The really key piece is to kind of break it up and always relate back to those original goals. The bite-sized pieces really help fit it into something like Trello, Asana. Those user stories come back and they make it really actionable, and they tie it back to the original reason you're doing the project is to deliver value to somebody at the university and really make something a better experience for them or a new experience for them. And that's kind of the end result.
And one of the things Andrew's mentioning about tracking against goals, we try to make sure that we keep those main points of the project up front, and that is something you can automate. It's almost like you can send out a reminder of these were the top goals, or if you're using Slack, you can pin that piece we do that often for ourselves just to like remember, okay, 5 months down the road, we've had all these twists and turns on the project. Why were we doing this in the first place? What was the main goal? What are we needing to make sure that we're held accountable to? And that also is another reason why at the beginning we talked about measuring right out of the gate. Because if you're measuring what you're trying to impact as projects take the twists and turns that we know that they're going to take, you still are held accountable to that original need, that original project goal. And so like I say, try to stick to the plan. This is an agency thing too. So I know that there's more twisting and turning probably on your side too, but we try very hard to stick to the plan until you can't stick to the plan, because things happen and you have to shift stuff around.
And plans have to change. So, yep. I mean, if they have to change, that's fine. Just take a minute to pause and acknowledge that they're changing. Because the worst thing to happen is for your scope to creep out. Oh,
yeah, right. There you go. That's the next one.
The worst thing to happen is your scope to slowly creep out. But if you pause every time that you have to go back and adjust that original list of success, requirements, maybe that new success requirement is that now all of a sudden your inquiry form has to take social media profiles too, and people have to log into Twitter to be able to submit an inquiry for whatever reason they need to do that. But if that becomes a success metric, pause for a second, add it back to the original list and say, okay, now we've added this in. This is going to take an extra X number of weeks. But don't just let it sneak in there. Just take a second to acknowledge that it's coming in there and work accordingly.
This is where if you're organized from the start with this kind of stuff, and I'm probably preaching to the choir with you on some of this stuff, but if you're organized from the start, when stuff does start to creep, you're in a much better position to say, hey, client, that's a really great idea. This is changing the scope of things. So now's a good time for me to tell you that this is going to change the output. This is going to change the time or resources necessary to accomplish the goal. And because you've been organized the entire time, then your client, or if you are the client, your team isn't looking at you like, why are you, shifting the chair on me or moving the goalpost on me halfway through without, a whole lot of conversation.
And I mean, holding everybody accountable is back from the start. If you're using a tool like Trello, or you're not even using a tool at all, you're just you've had people set their own due dates, and instead of saying, Pat, get this done, you say, Pat, when can we get this done, or what's doable for you? It's something that he's got control over. Right. So it's something that he can say, okay, this is going to take me 2 weeks. And you come back and you can say, okay, Pat, you said that this was going to take 2 weeks. Where are we at with this? Instead of me saying, Pat, get this done in a week, or him saying, Andrew, get this done in a week. And then a week comes by, and then all of a sudden that relationship has just come a little bit more sour because he's setting hard deadlines and maybe they're doable, maybe they're not. Flipping that on its head and saying, can you set the deadline for me, makes that a lot easier to keep everybody accountable.
So just to kind of come back to the project we were having as a background for this. Again, so with the idea that the CMS was a legacy CMS that really didn't allow for a lot of flexibility, and with the idea that the dev team had talked about wanting to do a redesign. And actually part of this conversation between the dev team, Marcom, and the client at the college, got the college president involved and got him thinking about allocating the resources for a website redesign because of the challenges that they were running up against. And they were actually able to budget that into the next year. And I'm not sure if they would have done that if they hadn't had all of these parties at the table having this conversation together. So in the meantime, we did it just some bridging of, picking up some landing pages, things that would be easier on mobile, especially for, not to get into the media side of things, but a lot of the media choices we may make may tilt mobile. And if we're going to do that, we don't want people getting to a bad mobile experience from a mobile specific media. And then kind of the big piece for us was building out a much easier inquiry form, something that was simple, would get them what they needed, and also would build, this is something that Andrew did a great job of, is this very simple form will tie you to one of their 2 campuses and immediately to an enrollment counselor that specializes in the program you're interested in. That enrollment counselor gets an automatic notification. This is something that's built into a lot of CRMs. They hadn't had one, so we basically built one from scratch where they would get immediate notification, this person's interested in such and such program. The prospect would get an immediate thank you and then get dumped into a 6 or 8 step email campaign that would come from their specific counselor. So we see a lot of people replying back to the automated emails right to the counselor, and that kicks off a conversation between them, which has really helped their admissions process.
And one of the biggest things here, I mean, from originally that original spec of, okay, let's track those goals and let's, reverse the kind of decline in enrollment, is maybe part of it was a problem with their website. The bigger problem was with a lot of the process behind the scenes. So to optimize that process and really get people through that workflow, that was the biggest win there. But that wasn't something that was, immediately obvious from the start. It was after you did that digging and you kind of formalized some of those requirements and said, this is something, that's really a problem now that we've investigated it. So always look below the surface and keep digging.
And something that was a lot easier to talk with them about, and if you guys are sitting from a development seat talking to a client about maybe something that's uncomfortable to talk with them about, like that their sales processes need some fix, with them involved out of the gate and saying, okay, what's the problem? Let's find the underlying issue. When we were able to elevate, okay, we did some secret shopping and this was our experience, it made that conversation a lot clearer and a lot less like, we're not trying to tell you you're doing a bad job. We're just saying this is what we're seeing. And then they look at it and go, okay, we need to improve that. So now all of a sudden, the client is on board as well. The business unit is on board, and it's not like you have to lecture to them or vice versa. Just makes things a lot cleaner. So we've kind of gotten through that part of the process. We implemented everything actually January 3rd of this year. Their monthly lead generation has doubled each month since January, and their applications for fall are up 30%. They're looking like they're actually going to hit their goal, which was up from a year ago. So there was a lot of marketing on top of this, but the main piece for us was that they had infrastructure issues that they needed to address, and we couldn't address them without kind of a combined effort from multiple silos within the college to make the change that they needed.
And pushing back on some of those original changes where, this can wait, for the whole website redesign and some things like that. It's not always a technical problem that needs to be fixed. Sometimes it's that underlying thing, but you're not going to discover that until you dig in. So this really helped them understand some of their processes better.
Found out exactly what they needed.
And we gave them exactly what they needed.
They needed the tire swing. So now I guess we wanted to leave some time for questions because you have, I think, 45 minutes in general. So we wanted to step back and leave some space for that and get some feedback and get a sense if anybody has any kind of questions about what we were talking about. Don't all hurry at once. Yes.
Coming from the non-technical folks side,
Sure.
what kinds of things do you need to hear from us that you typically don't hear, or the things questions that you aren't necessarily answering?
I'll start, but then I want you to take this. So again, because I kind of sit more on your side when it comes to the agency, and Andrew really runs our development stuff. From my perspective, just when we're talking with clients or people who are less technical, to me, it's never been an issue of like, I need to know exactly how this is going to work. It's how clearly can I outline the goals of the project? Like, this is really what we're trying to make happen, and really understanding at the underlying level, we're trying to improve the experience for this. So we're trying to, I just want to explain the outcomes, because then I find the solutions I get back from Andrew or other members of our team are a lot cleaner and a lot more on target if I'm really giving them the space to like do what, come back with whatever variety of options, but it has to, whatever you do, it has to go back to the swing thing, like it has to improve morale in the office. It's not about a 3-tiered swing. Maybe that's my cockamamie idea, but it has to improve morale, or it has to help us make the lead generation piece of our website easier or what have you.
Yeah, and I think the reason we spend so much time on process here is that a lot of times what we'll see is somebody comes to us and they say, I need this thing fixed. And maybe they come to us with that form. They say, Pat, Andrew, my website is not mobile responsive and my form doesn't work and it's not meant for, mobile phones and we're having all this problem. They're already jumping to solutions.
They're on symptoms and solutions.
And it's something that you don't have to be technical to work through the process. You don't have to be technical to ask the questions and to kind of take another look, kind of almost a look that isn't even in the direction of technical at all. Because you got to take a step back and look at the business and say, is it really that the form's not converting, or is it that we're letting people go, a week after they submit the form and not getting back to them? Is it because, we could even leave the existing form up there and just delete a couple of these. But if you took that form and you brought that to a dozen students and you said, is there anything wrong with this? They'd say, I don't want to give my address, just to find out when course registration is. And so all of a sudden you delete the address off that form and you've got to fix that as a technical. So.
Well, because I was also going to say, to a certain extent, some of the conversations I've had have been, well, you can't do that. And in some cases, it's true. There is not the ability to do certain things, but sometimes it's more, or to understand that, well, yeah, it's going to cost a lot more money to program. But sometimes I like what you're saying in terms of really trying to get a sense of what the customer is wanting, because then there may be ways to do it. But,
and
I kind of just one of the things that I'd find too, and because we've employed other development people who are not as awesome as Andrew. We've worked with other development people that we've had issues where you get that. Just and the question was, how do you handle no from a non-technical perspective? I'm supposed to tell the people at home about the question. What I find is a great follow-up is why. Okay, you can't do that. Okay, why? Because what I think we all have kind of found, like, it's not, can't is a really strong word for the web. You can pretty much do anything. It's just, what is it going to entail? So when you tell me can't, why not? And it may be because the cost, the time, the whatever, I'm going to agree. I'm going to say, yes, you're right, let's not do that. But when you can understand the why, now as a non-technical person, I can edit myself when I'm coming to you, to coming to my technical people with questions and say, okay, I think I understand this may not work so well because you've told me, because we've had these conversations. I mean, just from, from our seat as an agency too, something that I have to be very careful with is I'm technical in the stream of technical, there's technical and not as technical. But understanding what to promise the clients, and when we're having conversations that where I don't have somebody technical in the room, understanding, because I've had all these conversations over years and years, knowing kind of where the lines are and where would be promising too much and stuff that's useful because of asking for money.
And I mean, even coming from the perspective of somebody more technical, if a client comes to you with a solution, the first instinct is to say, okay, we can or can't do that solution. And if that solution ends up being something that isn't something that would work within the existing infrastructure, the answer is no. Because the solution's already planned out. But if you come in with more of a question of, how do I increase enrollment? And you say, can you give me your opinions on that? Then it's like, okay, well, we could take this, and that strategy within the existing infrastructure. But if you're crazy busy and you've got, 10 minutes set up for this meeting, and you come in and you look at a solution and you say it's not possible, that's the easy default answer.
Sometimes sort of the other problem as well is some little request comes in and it's not a huge thing, and the developer just jumps on it and does a custom one-off, and sort of like, why didn't you ask for more questions? Like, is this a more universal thing that could be a bigger, more useful project, or sort of waste your time and create something that's going to cause headaches down the road? So I don't know if you have ideas about how you sort of like create this culture of consulting instead of just saying yes or no.
Yeah, I mean, that was something we snuck in as a bullet point, the think bigger, that I would have loved to do a whole nother talk on, because it's almost like the non-technical talk for technical people, because it's the same process, but it's the other side of it. And it's Part of that might come from some senior developers, you know, kind of looking over, doing code reviews, and that idea of, you know, think globally, act locally, that sort of technical perspective, because really anything you're doing as a developer, you should be doing it at the smallest level to do the change, but then thinking about how that's going to impact the higher up and how that can get globalized. Sometimes in WordPress that works really well as something that starts in a theme. And maybe it's a, you know, a theme change for this one-off thing. And then after you make a couple of different theme changes with the same change, maybe that's a better fit for plugin. So let's take that out of these themes, put it into a plugin, and make that as an offering there. And that was a lot of the stuff we did at BU. Interactive design would do lots of themes, and then we'd say, okay, these things look great, but now, you know, we're trying to change the color and all these different, you know, widgets that we've made. So let's put that out to a plugin and make that an option, and you know, globalize it that way. So it works really well within WordPress, even if it starts at that low level, for some refactoring, which is a little bit of work, but a plugin offering is a great solution there.
Still have a little bit of time, but I wanted to follow up on your question about culture too, because I think from a technical perspective, there's a lot of great options there of what you can do with a small change. I also think something we try to do really hard is anytime you get that is just instill the idea of, okay, anytime you get a request, there are 3 or 4 questions that you need to ask to understand the request, and that everybody on the team needs to understand that this is the expected process, and that it doesn't have to be like, try to keep it edited so that it's not onerous. You're not taking something simple and making a mountain out of a molehill, but also asking, these are 3 questions you got to know before you do anything, and just real basic stuff like, what's the underlying goal of this piece of work? How could it be used in any other instance? And how are we going to measure its effectiveness? I mean, those are good 3 places to start. And usually for something that's small that maybe is just a one-off, or you don't need to waste a lot of time with it, you can still answer those 3 questions in a pretty reasonable amount of time and execute the one-off, where you're not just always executing one-offs from little things and then get to a point where you have to, you know, expunge the one-offs and redo everything. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay.
I don't know. Topic of this.
We get a whiteboard. I mean,
yeah, right.
So oftentimes, I'm on the technology side, and oftentimes we're implementing things for purely technological reasons. Like, for instance, we're switching to a new portal right now because our old portal servers are dying. The portal platform that they run on is end of life in December of 2015. And so
that's pretty recent, though.
Critical that we move to a new portal solution, but explaining that to users who don't have the technical understanding has been a challenge. And a lot of the feedback that we immediately get is, we're fixing something that's not broken. And I don't
You're
know,
like, but it is broken. You don't understand.
From their perspective,
yeah.
It's working, it's doing what they need to do. This idea of change is scary and daunting, especially to faculty and employees. And students are adaptive, but faculty and employees are like, change. So I don't know if you have any advice about just how to go about communicating how something's critical from a technical perspective, even when it's getting the nitty-gritty of why, and that the servers are dying. I don't know what to tell them. The servers are dying. Yeah. We also don't want to incite panic. So, so I don't know how to. I mean, go about that.
It's a tough problem. You know, it's a tough problem because there's a huge gap there. Transparency helps a lot. You know, being honest and upfront and saying we're being proactive. This is something that we need to do, and you know, we're kind of looking out for you. And you know, it might not. All the technical details might not make sense. Sometimes having like a blog post that's a shorter version that says, hey, here's what we're doing. Then if you want to read more about the details, you know, you click here and go read more, like a full technical write-up if they're curious about any pieces of that. Like, you know, we're addressing end-of-life issues and you know, about it. But analogies help really well. You know, the equivalent of, you know, saying we're you know, running an oil change on the car kind of thing. You know, we're taking it in for service. It is very hard from an agency perspective to explain WordPress maintenance to clients for all the same reasons, because they say that, you know, we put this thing up and what do you mean now you have to go in and do something with it every month? Doesn't it just do it itself? So it's a tough
That was easy.
Yeah, mail them all one of those.
So in that instance, because that's a challenge we face all the time, and we do, 2/3 of our work is in higher ed, and then another third is another like smaller portion is in healthcare. And so a lot of times we're doing, multi-site setups for like a senior living company that's got 100 or 200 smaller sites for individualized communities, and they don't understand why that requires a significant amount of maintenance, just because it's not an industry that's really used to technology. So we'll try to do, rather than, because then there's also the inherent like, okay, you're just trying to get more money out of me, kind of a feeling. And what we try to lay out is exactly what you said about just trying to outline what the consequences are, and without inciting panic, but just like really as cleanly and as upfront as you're saying, as truthfully about, here are the outcomes, and then we try to give choices as much as possible, and not say like, you have to do this.
Yeah.
We're bending, we're twisting our arm to back you into this choice. It's okay, here are your options. You can either not do maintenance, and when something goes horribly wrong, and here are the potential things that can go horribly wrong, this is your option for fixing those, which may be a lot more onerous than they want. Like, your site's going to be down for a week, you know what I mean, or something like that, versus you could do the maintenance plan, and this will be your outcome. So for you're talking about the servers, like, okay, you could do nothing, and one day the servers will crash, and everything that you've ever done on this system will no longer be available to you. You don't want to incite panic, but like, that's the kind of thing. It's like, here's your choice. You can either stare down the barrel of a gun, or we can slowly, methodically, and smartly make these adjustments.
And that's definitely the extreme. I mean, part of the sticking to something like saying like we're doing scheduled maintenance, and we're really kind of looking out for you and doing that. That's part of that kind of blog post would or that kind of publication would help you in the immediate term. But the bigger picture is kind of that relationship between IT and clients there. So to take a step back and have that ongoing transparency and keeping them up to date on an ongoing basis with this is the stuff we're doing, and really making it so that people don't have that perspective of, okay, well, IT is just telling me I need to do this now, or IT tells me I need to do things in general. And because it's more of a partnership than one direction either way. And figuring out ways to kind of break down those barriers and that kind of thing is the best way to make sure a message like, hey, we're doing scheduled maintenance, is something that's really well received. Take a look at some of the work that Buffer's done. Their social media sharing app, they do an amazing job with transparency. They've got a bunch of different perspectives on their blog about different postmortems and that sort of thing that are technical and not technical. So they do a great job with that. So that's an awesome model if you're looking for that.
We have time for probably one more. Everybody's got one they've been sitting on. Oh, all right.
Are there any interactions on the live feed? Or no, I'm not sure.
Me either.
Let's just do the hashtag. Where's my mouse? There it is.
Is that something up here?
Oh, okay.
Could be under you.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Well, thank you guys very much for hearing us out and spending the time.